Over the last 10 years, Simon and I have spoken to over 6,000 investors. But one thing we've never done is look at who's investing in Australia and the different strategies to go from where you are today to absolute financial freedom over the next 20 years. So as an absolute data geek who absolutely loves this stuff so I can make better returns and better decisions as an investor, let's talk about the makeup of the Australian property market and who's who in the zoo.
Now, of the 27 million Australians, there's only 2.2 million investors. So that's just 8% of the Australian population, but just 20% of Australian taxpayers actually invest in property. Now, if we break down that 2.2 million investors into the different cohorts as to how many properties they actually own, it's pretty wild to see that such a small portion of investors ever get to a huge portfolio. Now, 71% of investors only ever get to one property, 19% of investors get to two properties, 6% of investors get to three properties, and then less than 1% of investors ever get to 6 or more investment properties. Now, I gathered all of this information from a great article from The Guardian a couple of years ago, and what was actually insane is that a quarter of those properties, so 25% of those investment properties, are owned by less than 1% of taxpayers. And this is why the rich keep getting richer and why it's so challenging for people to crack into the property market.
Now, I know our mum and some of our aunties have been playing around on Ancestry.com over the last couple of years, and there's a very, very, very loose association between our family and Robinhood. What are you trying to say here?
All I'm trying to say is let's try and increase those percentages a little bit, all right? But let's say that it's 2026 and you want to get started and play it a little safe, become a part of that 71% of investors that get to one investment property. Now, if you were to go buy a joint for, say, $700,000, what could it do for me in the long term?
Now, if we hold that one 700K property for the next 20 years and it goes up by just 5% per annum, 20 years from today, it could be worth as much as $1,857,000. Now, something that Simon and I have been thinking about a huge amount over the last couple of years is how to go from an average investor, which is sort of going out there and just buying anything or buying in your own backyard because it feels safe, to becoming a great investor, which means following the history and the fundamentals of property to make the best decision possible on everything you buy from this year forward. Now, if we were to go out there and look at this same one property at 700K, but instead of growing by 5% per year, it grew by 7% a year for the next 20 years, that property could be worth as much as $2,708,000. Now, while a 2% difference might not feel like a lot, and when you're looking at one property on day one versus another, it might not feel like a big difference in the decision that you make, that 2% a year over 20 years on this one property could make you $851,000 better off, which is insane.
Now, I remember reading a quote from Warren Buffett that said, compound growth is the sixth wonder of the world, and I'm starting to realize exactly why that's the case. But one property sounds great and those numbers look incredible, but a lot of the investors that I've talked with want to take it a lot further than that. Not just one property, but maybe 3 properties. So what is it going to look like as you build a larger portfolio?
So let's say in 2026, you already own one investment property or your own home. And let's say that the value, I'm literally pulling it out of thin air, is $1 million right now. And you go out there and you buy a second property worth 700K. Now, let's say 12 months down the line, you've got these 2 properties and you're feeling really, really good about what you've done. It's all starting to make sense. The rents have gone up a little bit. The debts have come down a little bit and you're feeling way more educated about property. So you go out there and you do some crazy stuff and you get a third one, the third one being another 700K property. So at the end of accumulating these 3 properties, one worth $1 million and 2 worth 700K each, you're sitting on about $2.4 million worth of property. So let's say in this example that you just get that 5% return on these properties over a 20-year period. They've gone from $2,400,000 to $6,367,000, which is absolutely insane, even with an average decision.
Now, these numbers look absolutely amazing, but I don't think people really want to be an average investor. I know everybody's striving to become a great investor. So what's the difference between the 5% return versus the 7% compound growth rate over 20 years?
Now, what's insane is those 3 properties worth $2.4 million with a 7% growth rate compounded over that time could be worth as much as $9,287,000, giving you a $2,920,000 difference between a 5% return and a 7% return over 20 years. Now, while that number is insane, we're talking almost a $3 million difference between being a great investor and an average investor. What we're really talking about here is time back in your life. So financial freedom earlier, the ability to leave work 10, 15 years earlier, the ability to spend more time with your family, to travel more, to do more meaningful work, to get healthier, to volunteer, to contribute more to charity and your family, and be a much more present, better version of yourself. So while we've spent 16 years figuring out investment fundamentals and being obsessed with this, it was never so that we could just make that extra 2 or 3 million bucks over the next 20 years. It was to get our time back and to live the life of our dreams.
Now, I was having some fun the other day and looking back at some properties that we bought for clients back in 2016 to see what the compound growth rate had been over that 9-year period up until 2025. And we bought this awesome property in Kippa-Ring for one of our clients, Adrian, who was a really experienced investor. He was a baller. He had a large property portfolio and he could see the blood in the water in Brisbane in 2016. Now, we picked up a property for just shy of $370,000. Nice little 3-bed, 1-bath, high-set Queenslander on a 600 square metre block of land in a quiet, family-friendly street, not too far from the water, not too far from the local schools and shops and all of the infrastructure. And when I looked on realestate.com, which is always conservative, it was saying that the property in 2025 is now worth $879,000. So that's up 144% over that 9-year period. But if I open up a compound growth calculator, that actually spits out a 10% compound growth rate over the last 9 years. So when we talk about 5% versus 7%, if you know how to identify those super undervalued markets, those really high quality suburbs and the best properties within those suburbs on the best streets, on the big blocks of land, you can even take that compound growth rate even further.
You know, congratulations, Adrian. If you're here, I give you a high five, man, because I know a lot of people think that Brisbane just did well from 2020, but man, there was so many opportunities back in 2016 as well. Now, even as a 24-year-old, I didn't want to own one property. And I didn't even want to own 3 properties. I always had big dreams and big aspirations of becoming one of that 1% of investors Australia-wide with a portfolio of 6+ properties. Now, while people with 6 or more properties is such a small percentage of Australians, we work with people like this all the time. In fact, so many of our clients are in the $10 to $100 million range. Now, what I've learned from these ballers is they go extremely hard and extremely aggressive at the start of their accumulation journey, and then they allow time to do the heavy lifting through leverage. Now, let's say that you're sitting out there with 3 properties at the moment, and you go out there and you buy 3 more properties over the next couple of years. Now, you might have one that's worth 2 mil, another one that's worth 1 mil, and one that's worth 750K today. And then you go out there and you buy the simple stuff, the bread and butter, using the fundamentals and the science of property investing, and you go out there and get another 700K one, another $1 million one, and another 800K one, which in total, which is probably where I should have started with all of that, leaves you with $6,250,000 worth of property. Now, let's say with this $6 million plus of property, you hold them for the next 20 years and you just get the average return of 5% per annum, which clearly means you're not listening to our stuff, because we know you can do so much better than this with the right team and the right ideas around you. But let's say you go out there like we know you're going to, and you get that 2% per year because you're going from average investing to great investing from this point forward. Now, that same portfolio, a bit over $6 million bucks, at a 7% return for 20 years, places this portfolio at $24 million, 185K. Now, the difference between 5% and 7% might not sound like a lot, but as you said before, Simon, as we get more and more properties or more and more wealth, a 2% difference can be so significant. And that 2% difference in this same example of the 6 properties represents about a $7.5 million difference in your net worth in 20 years' time, which is why we are so serious about using history and the science of property investing to make decisions from 2026 moving forward.
And what's even more wild is we know that incredible investors sometimes are able to generate a stronger return than even 7% as well. And the harsh reality of Australian property is because 60 to 70% of the market are average mums and dads that are just trying to buy their own home, is people don't think strategically like this. People don't think about the science of property investing, and they believe that they can just go out there and generate a great return. And as you've educated everybody on today, Ben, is if you get that average 5% return, you're going to change your life for the better. You're going to put yourself in an amazing position. But if you can just think a little bit more, if you can just make slightly better decisions, understand timing, understand cycles, understand fundamentals, understand how money moves through this country, and just getting that extra 2% can completely change your life. So we want people to start thinking about, how can I get that 2% extra compounded growth over the next 20 years on my portfolio so that I can not just support myself and my family, but my extended family and friends and the community around me? Because $7.6 million on a $6 million property portfolio over 20 years is an insane amount of money.
So if you guys, like myself and Simon, are looking to buy an investment property in the next 3 to 12 months, and you are getting serious about investing and you're looking for ways to get that extra 2% per year that nobody else is finding and that nobody else is looking for, then we would love to offer you a one-on-one strategy session. Simply go to www.pumpedonproperty.com, click that free strategy session button. We can talk about where you are right now, where you'd like to be longer term. We can deeply educate you on the Australian market. We've recently looked at over 4,000 suburbs, or the 20 largest markets in the country, and ranked them from most overvalued to most undervalued. And you can take that information and go and absolutely smash it on your own, or potentially become one of the small number of clients that we take on each week. But either way, we wish you all the best for this new year, and we're super excited to go find that value and to become great.